My name is Jackson McRae, 29 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas. By most standards, you could say I'm one of the luckiest young men of my generation. I wasn't born into wealth. My father was a mechanic, my mother a nurse. But by the time I was still in college, I knew I didn't want a typical life. At 22, I sold my first startup for a seven-figure sum. By 25, I owned a string of data centers from Dallas to Atlanta. Now I live in a ranch-style estate sprawling across 10 acres in hill country, with a garage full of restored Mustangs, a Harley Davidson, and a Range Rover for casual drives. I don't say that to brag. I say it so you understand. I could afford anything. And yet I still lacked someone to share it all with. I met Savannah Whitmore at a charity auction in Houston. She wore an emerald green dress, graceful, striking, and walked with the confidence of someone who knew the weight of 1,000 eyes and didn't care. She was the evening's host, representing a children's cancer hospital fund. I was by the cocktail bar, sipping bourbon, but my eyes hadn't left her since the moment she took the mic. After the auction ended, we talked. Savannah was sharp, opinionated, and poised. Not fake sweet, not sugar-coated. She didn't flinch at my Richard Mille watch, didn't ask what car I drove, or what my net worth was. She looked me dead in the eye, and that was the first time in years I felt seen, not sized up. We started dating soon after. Savannah brought gentleness into my world of speed and precision. She cooked dinners on weekends, scribbled notes about what I liked in a little leather notebook. When I injured my knee, snowboarding in Aspen, she stayed by my bedside for days, reading to me like it was the most natural thing. I'd always believed love was a negotiation, give and take, power and status. But with her, for the first time, I began to think maybe love could just be. So when I got down on one knee beneath lantern lights in the garden I had custom built for her birthday, I knew what I was doing. I wasn't just proposing. I was giving her my past, my future, my name, everything. She said yes. And I believed, with all my heart, that this was the beginning of something real. Just a few weeks after the engagement, Savannah invited me to visit her hometown, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a historic seaside town where colonial-style homes lined maple-shaded streets and every porch looked like it belonged on a postcard. Her family lived in a three-story gray stone estate tucked behind iron gates and thick hedges. When I stepped through the door, I was greeted by the faint scent of polished pine wood and designer perfume. The kind of smell that lingers long after the welcome is over. Her father, Mr. Howard Whitmore, was a tall, lean man with a precise smile and silver-rimmed glasses that seemed permanently attached to his face. His handshake was firm, his tone warm but measured, as if he were meeting a client, not his future son-in-law. Her mother, Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore, was a refined woman with icy blonde hair, pinned in a tight bun, and a cashmere dress the color of autumn leaves. She offered a perfectly practiced hug that never threatened her makeup. Dinner was an exercise in decorum. The table was set with silver flatware so polished I could see my reflection. Conversation revolved around safe topics: Portsmouth history, charity galas, family acquaintances in banking and real estate. Everything was civilized, graceful, and carefully calculated. No one asked about my net worth. No one mentioned the Range Rover or the estate in Texas. Instead, they spoke in vague terms: long-term stability, shared values, the importance of family legacy. Savannah, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand beneath the table. Her smile was soft, affectionate, reassuring. I looked at her and thought, they're just being protective. That's what families do. After dinner, Mr. Whitmore poured me a glass of vintage cognac from his private collection. He swirled the amber liquid and said in his deep, deliberate voice, "A man is judged not just by what he owns, but by how he holds on to it." I smiled back and replied, "And also by how he honors the people he holds close." Something flickered behind his eyes. Approval or calculation? I couldn't tell. 3 months later, we got married. It was a perfect ceremony, an oceanfront wedding at Rye Beach, under white banners and lavender blooms, bathed in the soft golden haze of a New England sunset. Savannah wore a vintage ivory lace gown, hand-stitched by her grandmother. I remember watching her walk down that lawn, her eyes shining, her lips trembling into a smile, and thinking, this is it. This is everything. We exchanged vows under a floral arch, barefoot on soft grass, as the breeze tangled in her hair. I promised to love her, protect her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. And I meant every word. At the time, I truly believed the Whitmores were a decent family. Maybe a little stiff, maybe a little traditional, but sincere. I truly believed love could bridge all differences. But real life, as I would soon learn, doesn't run on vows and fairy lights. It runs on leverage, appearances, and quiet hands reaching for what isn't theirs, cloaked in charm and crystal glasses. Barely a month after the wedding, the change began. Subtle, almost elegant in its timing. Savannah started talking about reasonable upgrades. She phrased it sweetly, like someone casually mentioning a weekend getaway. "Love, I was thinking, maybe we should look for a new place, something a little bigger. The current house, it doesn't really reflect who we are now." I froze mid-sip. That current house she referred to was the ranch-style estate I'd built from the ground up. My pride and joy, purchased when I was 24. Every brick, every archway a piece of my story. She smiled at me across the kitchen island, fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I just want us to grow into our future. Space for dinner parties. A proper nursery one day. Doesn't that sound like the next step?" Nursery? We hadn't even had that conversation yet, but Savannah moved through her pitch like a seasoned strategist. A few days later, while I was in a board meeting, she sent me an email with listings. Luxury estates in Highland Park. Price tags ranged from 5 to 8 million. Then came the car talk. She started making little comments about my Defender, how it looked rugged, a bit too off-roadish. "Wouldn't it be nice," she mused one night, "if we both drove Teslas, a matched pair of Model X's, modern, clean energy, image conscious?" I tried to stay calm. I was used to expensive circles. In my world, luxury wasn't new. But this wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about comfort. It was about optics. Everything Savannah brought up, the new home, the cars, the image, it all had the same subtext. What will people think of us? One night, I brought up our budget, offered to sit down and talk long-term goals, financial plans. She reached across the table, stroked my arm, and smiled like it was all a joke. Baby, you make more money than most small countries. Don't nickel and dime your own wife. That line, as light as it was, hit something deep inside me. Not because of the money, but because of the look in her eyes when she said it. She wasn't seeing me anymore. Not the man. Only the source. I kept trying to rationalize. All couples need time to adjust. Everyone wants a better life after marriage, right? But when requests become expectations, and expectations turn into entitlements, you begin to realize this won't stop here. It started with a simple text from Savannah one Saturday morning. My parents are coming to stay for a few days. I've already set up the guest room. Love you. I paused, coffee halfway to my lips. A few days? Sure, I could be flexible. But when I got home that evening, the Whitmore family SUV was already parked in the driveway, right in the middle, like a statement. Inside, I found Mr. Howard Whitmore lounging on my Italian walnut coffee table, boots caked in dirt, one leg thrown over the other, drinking a cheap domestic beer. Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore was in the kitchen, opening cabinets, rearranging things like she was prepping her own show on HGTV. Luggage was everywhere, not weekend bags, but full-sized trunks. Then came Toby, Savannah's younger brother, 22, long-term unemployed, wearing ripped jeans and a smug grin. He was fiddling with my limited edition Marshall speaker with fingers still sticky from barbecue sauce. On his wrist, my Omega Speedmaster, the one I kept locked in my private drawer. God knows how he even found it. I stood there, frozen. Savannah came out, practically glowing. Babe, isn't this great? They'll be staying for a couple weeks. You know how cold it gets this time of year? I looked at her carefully. A couple of weeks? When exactly were you planning to discuss this with me? She giggled, brushing my concern away like a feather on her sleeve. Come on, you're always so easygoing. It's just family. What's the big deal? The big deal. Let's start with my privacy, my space, and the fact that no one asked. The couple of weeks quickly turned into indefinite. Mr. Whitmore brought in a contractor to fix the slow Wi-Fi. Mrs. Whitmore changed all the bedding because the colors didn't match her seasonal aesthetic. Toby plugged his PlayStation into the main TV and played late into the night, completely ignoring the fact that I had to be up at 5 a.m. for a pitch meeting. I pulled Savannah aside, gently, still hoping, foolishly, that she might understand. This is my home. I let them stay out of respect for you, but they're rearranging my life like it belongs to them. She leaned in, pressing her palm to my chest like she was trying to calm a wild horse. They're my family, Jackson. If we can't be generous with the people who raised me, then what are we doing all this for? I looked around the house I'd built from nothing. The oak shelves I'd hand-finished. The artwork I'd chosen piece by piece. Now trampled under beer cans and demands. And I realized I was no longer the owner here. I was the stranger in my own story. I couldn't stay silent any longer. One night, after Mr. Whitmore brought in a contractor to remove part of the wrought iron gate I had installed, claiming it made the place look like a prison, I called Savannah into my office. She entered casually, holding a glass of red wine, smiling as if nothing in the world could be serious when the lighting was this warm. I shut the door quietly. We need to talk about your parents, about Toby, about this house. She sat on the leather Chesterfield like it was her own personal throne, swirling her drink. Why so serious, love? I tried to stay calm. This is my house. I welcome them out of respect for you. But they've made themselves permanent. They're using my personal things, changing the space. It's not a visit anymore. It's a takeover. Her face stiffened. So, what are you saying? I looked her dead in the eyes. I want them out. She placed her wine down, a little too firmly, and narrowed her gaze. Jackson, I'll be honest. When we got married, everything became ours. This house is no exception. My family has every right to be here. That's what marriage is, sharing, not calculating like it's a business deal. I stared at her in disbelief. This house was purchased years before our wedding. It was protected by a prenup that Savannah had willingly signed, a legal document that clearly stated it remained solely in my name. You signed a contract, I reminded her. This property isn't marital. It's protected. She gave a short, sharp laugh, one that sent a chill down my spine. Contracts are words, but behavior matters too. You let them stay. You didn't object. Under Texas law, that could be interpreted as intent to share. You gave them access. That's all a judge would need. And in that moment, I saw it. This wasn't ignorance. It wasn't naivety. It was a strategy. All that sweetness, all that southern charm, a mask, carefully worn until the right moment. A few days later, I received a letter from a law firm. Not mine. It was from a close family friend of the Whitmores, dressed in polite language but brimming with intent. It urged me to reconsider the housing rights of Savannah's family, citing domestic unity and emotional well-being. I read it in my office, the morning sun spilling across the desk, and felt something settle cold and final in my chest. They were going to take it. My home, my peace. Everything I'd built with my bare hands and stubborn heart. And I realized something else. They never loved me. They loved what I owned. They loved the open doors. They just hoped I'd be too polite to close them. It took me exactly one night to make my decision. No shouting, no drama. Just clarity. Cold and clean like the edge of a blade. The next morning, I sat in my attorney's office, Mr. Carter Whitley, the man who had handled every major deal in my professional life. I dropped the prenup and the property deed on his desk. I want to sell the house, immediately. He raised an eyebrow. Not going to lie, Jackson. I didn't think I'd ever hear those words. This place was your pride and joy. I looked him straight in the eye. It was. But sometimes, to save what matters most, you have to let go of what used to matter. It didn't take long. Within a week, we found buyers, a young couple from Dallas, newly flush from a tech IPO, in love with the land, the layout, and the view. We signed the deal in under 30 days. On the morning of the final walkthrough, I stood on the upstairs balcony one last time, watching the breeze move through the mesquite trees, sunlight filtering over the slate roof I'd installed with my own hands. There was no sadness, only finality. That evening, I walked back into my house for the last time and found a party in full swing. The Whitmores were in the backyard, hosting a full-blown cookout like they were filming a 4th of July commercial. Mr. Whitmore flipping burgers, Toby blasting music from the outdoor speakers, my Harley glinting in the sun like a prize he'd earned. Savannah spotted me and waved with a glass of sangria. "Babe, come join us." I set a thick envelope on the outdoor table. Inside were copies of the closing contract, notice of vacancy, and formal request to vacate within 10 business days. Savannah's smile faded as she opened it. What is this?" "The house has been sold," I said calmly. "The new owners take possession in 2 weeks. I'd suggest packing." The beer slipped from Toby's hand and shattered on the patio tile. Mr. Whitmore went red. "You can't be serious. This is our home now." "No, Howard," I said, still calm. "It never was. And legally, it never could be." Savannah rushed forward, grabbing my wrist. "Jackson, please, don't do this. We're a family." I looked her straight in the eye. "You stopped being my family the moment you tried to take what wasn't yours." They protested. They shouted. They pleaded. But I didn't budge. Within days, movers came. Furniture left. People scattered. Toby cursed and threatened until the very last moment, hurling insults like a child caught stealing candy. Mrs. Whitmore sobbed like she was being thrown into the street. And maybe, in a way, she was. Mr. Whitmore was quiet, lips pressed tight as he watched it all collapse like a sandcastle against the tide. Savannah was the last to leave. She stood at the end of the driveway, tears streaming down her face. "You'll regret this, Jackson McRae. One day, you'll realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her and said, "No, Savannah. Today, I took it back. I took myself back. And I closed the gate. Not with anger, but with peace." It didn't take long for word to spread. Barely a month after I closed the gate on the Whitmores, I started hearing whispers. Not from gossip sites or tabloids. No. From mutual acquaintances, business circles, old faces who couldn't resist a good postmortem. Savannah had moved on, or rather, latched on. His name was Derek Chandler, a real estate broker in Dallas with perfect hair, perfectly white teeth, and a perfectly rehearsed smile. The kind of man who lived on credit and charisma. A Maserati with no engine under the hood. Savannah dove into the relationship like a woman dying of thirst. She flooded her social media with pictures. Brunch on rooftops, champagne at country clubs, yacht weekends at Lake Travis, shopping sprees at Highland Park Village. From the outside, it looked effortless, glamorous. But I'd seen the way Savannah smiled when she was truly happy, and none of those smiles were it. Meanwhile, the Whitmore family was sinking, fast. After being evicted from my house, they returned to their ancestral home in Portsmouth, but it didn't last. They mortgaged the house to invest in a flip and sell project, a can't-miss opportunity Derek had pitched to them during cocktails one evening. It sounded brilliant. Buy up cheap properties, renovate quickly, sell high. Easy money. Savannah backed it. Fully. She poured in her remaining savings, took out a personal loan, even convinced her parents to sign over their house as collateral. 3 months later, the company was gone. Derek, nowhere to be found. Not a trace. What was left? A foreclosure notice nailed to the front door. Mrs. Whitmore, standing in line at the supermarket asking about expired produce. Mr. Whitmore spending long afternoons at the corner bar, sipping rail whiskey until the lights blurred. Toby, the proud, sarcastic little prince, now hauling drywall on construction sites just to make rent. And Savannah? I saw her once, by accident. She was sitting alone in a dark corner of a half-empty cafe in Portsmouth. The same cafe where she once sipped imported tea in silk blouses. Now, she wore an old coat, shoulders hunched, hair tied back in a messy knot. She held her coffee like it was her last warmth in the world. Her eyes had changed. No shine. Just wait. I didn't say anything. I didn't walk over. There was nothing left to say. She stood eventually, pushed the chair in, and walked out into the rain. No umbrella, no one waiting. Just her and the cold, wet street. The same people who once toasted her at galas now turned their backs in grocery aisles. Whispers chased her like shadows. Is that the girl who married the tech guy? Didn't she end up broke? Such a shame. She used to be someone. A few nights later, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I hadn't blocked. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't need to. Jackson, I know I messed up. Can we just talk? Please. I looked at the screen, and then I let it go dark again. Some doors don't slam. They simply never open again. I had a business trip that spring, a quiet investor summit in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I didn't go looking for closure. But sometimes, closure finds you anyway. The Whitmore house, the once pristine colonial estate tucked behind lilac hedges, looked abandoned. Paint peeled off in wide patches. The lawn was overrun with weeds. A bank repossessed sign hung crooked on the gate. No one had bothered to take it down. Neighbors barely spoke about them anymore. But when they did, it came in low tones, sideways glances. They used to throw Christmas parties, remember? I heard she was married to some tech guy, rich apparently. Lorraine's been asking for leftover bread at the bakery on Main. Howard just sits at O'Malley's now, every afternoon. Same bar stool. As for Toby, the one who once sat on my Harley like a king, he worked construction now. Stripped down drywall, cleaned out dumpsters, made $10 an hour under a guy named Rico who didn't even know how to pronounce his last name. And Savannah? I saw her again. Not on purpose. I was walking past an old cafe where we used to sit. The kind with hand-painted mugs and classical music floating through. She was in the farthest booth, coat wrapped tightly around her, holding a chipped mug with both hands like it might run away. There was no makeup, no designer bag, just her, and the dim yellow light outlining a woman worn down to bone and breath. No one approached her. No one whispered about her anymore. She was no longer news. I didn't speak to her. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't need to. She looked out the window, eyes drifting across the rain, as if waiting for something or someone. But nothing came. No call, no rescue, not even recognition. She stood slowly, dropped a few crumpled bills on the table, and disappeared into the mist, shoulders hunched, steps unsure. I stayed a moment longer, then walked out too. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, just because I had finally seen what I needed to see. The masks had all fallen. The noise had faded. The game was over, and no one was watching anymore. That summer, I left Texas, not to escape, just to breathe. I settled in Asheville, North Carolina, a mountain town tucked into the Blue Ridge, like a well-kept secret. Winding roads, coffee shops carved from old barns, houses that smelled of cedar and silence. I bought a small cabin on a hill, nothing flashy, just enough room for a man, a fire, and peace. Life, for once, slowed. I spent mornings making coffee the old way, watching sunrises cut through the trees like golden knives. Afternoons reading in quiet bookstores, sketching mountain ridge lines, hiking trails with names like Craggy Pinnacle and Looking Glass. There were no meetings, no suits, no whispers, just birdsong, pine needles underfoot, and the sound of my own breath, something I hadn't really heard in years. One day, at a used bookstore on Lexington Avenue, I met June. She wore black-rimmed glasses, a canvas jacket, and spoke like someone who loved words more than likes. She didn't ask what I drove. She didn't care what I built. She asked me, Hemingway or Steinbeck? We talked for an hour, then two, about literature, about small towns, about leaving, returning, and why we sometimes need both. I didn't fall in love that day. I didn't need to. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't the only one standing quietly at the edge of something new. I don't know where life goes from here. I don't make declarations anymore. I don't chase what glitters. I just wake up, open the windows, and let the light in. We all take roads that break us. Some we walk willingly. Some we're pushed down. But one day, when the noise stops and the smoke clears, you look around and realize you didn't lose. You just changed directions. And sometimes that's all it takes to be free.